Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about wherever I may roam, building high-functioning distributed agile teams. I'm Tommy Norman. I am the Chief Agility Officer here at Acklen Avenue. Acklen Avenue is a custom software development company and staff augmentation team out of here in Nashville is where I'm based, but we're all over the world in, I think, 17, 18 countries now. And I, as the Chief Agility Officer, help make sure that we are doing Agile in all the things we do as a company. I also run the Agile Nashville user group, agilenashville.com. I'll have links to all this stuff later on in the presentation. If you are ever in the Nashville area, please check us out. We have monthly meetings with a very wide variety of topics voted on by the attendees. I also help run a conference that we didn't have last year, and we are working on trying to get it back in place this year, Music City Agile, which is part of a larger conference called Music City Code that or Music City Tech. It has Music City Code, Music City Agile, Music City Data, or three conferences all rolled into one. And we're looking at possibly doing that this year in the fall. And also, if you like today and like kind of what you hear, I also do a lot of videos and training videos on O'Reilly Learning. If you do O'Reilly Learning online, used to be Safari Books Online, and I have a lot of training videos there. And you can check out some more information there. I also have a lot of other webinars I've done for Acklen that are on our website too. And there'll be links to all of this stuff a little bit later on. But enough about me. Let's get into remote teams. And I have to give a confession in that I don't particularly like remote agile teams. I like, and not just agile teams, I just don't like work, remote away from my people as a tendency. I'm a social person. I like to be around the people I'm working with in a room, solving problems, rolling our sleeves up. But that's just not always practical to always be together. And so I have been working now with fully remote at Acklen. We're fully remote, born remote, been nothing net. And then working with all sorts of different agile teams before then. But as we said, distributed is now becoming a way of life. We have post-pandemic where people were kind of forced to work this way, and now there's a big push to remain that way. And I wanted to talk about today how we really can embrace a remote culture as a company. Now, as I said, I've worked in all different types of one. I am working currently 100% remote. Our teams are completely remote. I've worked with 100% co-located. I've been in places where we're all in the same location. I've done part-time remote. Sometimes we're in, sometimes we're not. And I've done all sorts of hybrids and in between. And with varying success with all of these. There's different, each one is good for certain things or certain companies or certain types of teams. And I don't think there's one silver bullet that does them all, but I have been lucky enough to work in all of them. I've sometimes been in the same company where I've had teams doing all four of these different things in the same company, which is really interesting to see because I can kind of say, all right, which one is performing better, which, things are working with one team and not working with another team. Now, I want to make sure that I don't want to talk about tactics in this. So I'm not going to say, oh, everybody should keep their cameras on and you should have a really good headset and things like that. You should do those things, but this is not about low-level tactics about being remote and working remote and those types of things. This is about a culture. This is about a strategy around how you adopt being remote, which I think is actually as important, if not more important than all the tactics around being remote. Because a company strategy has to still be around, I'm a company, I'm a business, I am trying to make money and be profitable and provide value to customers or provide value internally for whatever reason. And when I'm adopting a remote culture, we need to still tie that back into business value. So, let's talk about that. What are remote team benefits? And we've seen plenty of articles out there about this now. So one is cost savings. I don't have to have a big office for everybody to be in, so I can save some money on that. I can attract the best talent because I can get talent anywhere. Rather than only having to be able to hire from a pool in certain areas where I'm actually located, I can, if I find somebody in nowhere, Idaho, I can hire that person. And also employee retention. It's a big one now. Happy employees who can work remotely and have flexibility that might be attractive and keep them employed with me. And then the idea of increased productivity, people not having to drive as much, they have more freedom at home to do things like that. Now, I want to put a pin in that because we're going to come back to what do we mean when we talk about productivity, because there's some things we need to talk about that, about how much that actually happens. But before we get there, I want to kind of go back to one of the reasons it's hard when we talk about working remote, especially with Agile teams, is that Agile from its very inception really promotes face-to-face conversations, individuals' interactions over process and tools, which is one of the main values. And then you also have one of the main principles, which is the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. And of course, when we go remote, we don't have that as much. We are not doing as much face to face. We are having to rely on some processes and tools, especially just like we're on Zoom right now. We have to rely on some tools to kind of replace that. And the reason I bring this up is we just have to be honest with ourselves in that, the richness of being very collaborative, agile teams involves communication. And this chart's been around forever, talking about the richness of types of communication, and the best communication, or the most effective and the richness of it, is face to face with like a whiteboard or someplace where we're drawing the things and stuff like that. And then you kind of start degrading from there: face to face conversations, video conversations, phone conversations, email, paper being the worst one, the lowest level one. It's not the less rich of these. And so, we know that when I'm not in the same room, face to face, having these conversations, that trying to emulate that is, second best, and, we know it. We've seen all the things of, oh, you're on mute. Oh, yeah, I can't hear him. Oh, he dropped off, and things like that. There's just a certain friction to trying to replicate that face to face that we can't get anywhere else. And that's okay. But let's just admit, okay, I've watched teams in Slack communicate back and forth for an hour, and I'm like, I absolutely know if you'd been in a room together, that conversation would have taken 5 minutes. So we are losing something when we're doing that. We're losing some of the richness of this face-to-face communication. But that's why the benefits have to be there, because we have to, does the benefit outweigh the loss of this? Now, a lot of times you'll have people come back about productivity. I am more productive when working at home. You see a lot about this, but that does not always equal to our teams deliver more value working remotely. Just because, the individuals get more productive or more optimized because I'm not having to drive and, I'm not wasting all that time, doesn't necessarily mean I'm getting more value as a whole, as a company, as a team. And we just need to realize that things might take a little bit longer. Yes, I may have done a lot of, really great work today, and you did a lot of great work today, but because we're not working together, maybe not putting that together, it's not as collaborative. I'm not getting that synced up to then actually get the value of both of those things have to happen. Let's think about like dev and QA and things like that, where both of those things have to happen before I could deliver something, getting something deployed. And I see this all the time. We get something done. I go into Slack and say, hey, this is done. It's ready for somebody to pick up. Or I go into my Trello board or wherever it is. And then because somebody else is working remotely and they're not in the same room, they don't pick on that. And there's stuff that's left on the table. And we just know that happens. And I just need us to kind of admit, okay, we know that happens. There is some inefficiencies there, but there are things that I gain from that. So while, I know the richness of communication and a lot of the collaboration is going to work better when I am together than when I'm remote, there is definitely things that I can pursue, these benefits we talked about. So let's go back to why your company wants to work remote. I see a lot of articles of why a person wants to work remote, but let's talk about the company a little bit more. So, right now, most companies are doing this for this reason: best talent and employee retention, number one. So when you see all these companies that are coming back from the pandemic, and now that it's safe to kind of bring everybody in, quote unquote, they're demanding everybody come back in. And now there's huge, amounts of people leaving companies because I don't want to go back to working that way. And so a lot of companies are coming up with some type of remote offering, but they're doing it out of fear. And that's not necessarily the best way. A remote strategy should not be based on fear. I'm afraid people will leave if I don't get back to some type of remote offering, or I won't be able to hire people. People won't come. I won't be able to retain and attract talent for that. And if that's kind of your thought process, because you were all co-located at the beginning, then you're going to build your remote strategy on fear. And that's not going to be good, because what you'll see is it'll be a half-assed remote culture. You'll see a leadership talking about being remote, but they'll always be thinking about co-locating. They'll always have one foot in there. They'll always be kind of waiting for the gotcha moment to go, see, that didn't work. Everybody come back in there. And that's not going to work. That is going to be, a half measure, and there's going to be friction with that. So let's talk about, how do you create a good remote working strategy that's not based on fear? And so number one, you just need to align this remote strategy, has to be something that aligns with your company strategy. As a company, why do you want to be remote? And we talked about some of those benefits. So I've worked at companies where their big thing was, I want the best talent no matter where they are. So if I need a .NET developer and the best one is, as I said, like somewhere in Idaho, and as long as he has a good internet connection and he can work, then maybe that lack of communication and collaboration we talked about, that being diluted a little bit is worth it, because I'm getting such higher grade talent than I normally would. And they may be able to produce more, even with being remote and some of the friction that goes with that. I can tell you that, like my company. So when we do this, we're a big thing of, you choose where you want to be. We're in 17, 18 countries now. And it's kind of one of our things. We, attract people a lot with this, because you can work from anywhere. We are built 100% remote, and that does a lot of things. It attracts a lot of talent for us because they like that. The other thing it does is it helps with some cost savings, because we can be in a lot of countries where the economics make it to where those salaries are necessarily not the same as I would have to be in the States or in other places where the economics demand higher salaries. And that opens up a lot of possibilities. I can maybe make more margin. I can maybe charge a little bit less, and maybe be a little bit more price conscious for people. I can maybe offer more benefits that normally aren't available in that country, because they're actually going through usually an American company. And at Acklen, that's definitely something that we do. That's what we use it for, is talent, and then some of the cost savings that come along with that. But that's where you have to make remote work a first-class citizen in your culture. That's when I came on board. And again, coming from a lot of co-located teams and immediately going to 100% remote, it seemed like I was always trying to think of a way to get back to getting everybody together. And I had to unlearn that. And I'm like, no, we are a remote first company. Yeah. And you may not be remote first, you may be hybrid or anything like that, but we had to see that remote work was on the same level as all the other work. It wasn't treated as some second-class citizen. It had to be a first-class citizen, not only in what we say, but how we act. And if I was constantly, lamenting about, and I did this, if we were in a room together, we would solve this problem, blah, blah, blah. I had to stop that, because it was showing that I didn't think that this was the best solution. But then when I saw that, my teams could be very effective, they could be highly collaborative. Yes, are there times where we would have maybe solved something a little bit faster, or gotten to the answer a little bit better, or gotten a better answer being there? Maybe. There's maybe those times. But we could find great talent. And then we do implement some process and tools that try to get as much of that collaboration and stuff back. But we have to make it part of the actual culture. And a first class is just along with anything else, not something I'm doing just because I have to do it, because now I can't attract people. Again, I've seen so many people that the second they feel like remote is not working, they're looking for a reason to bring everybody back in. And you're seeing this time and time again with companies now. The other thing I would talk about is focus on outcomes and give teams autonomy. A lot of times what I hear is there's just, I don't think my teams are working when they're all remote. I don't see them. I don't see the butts and seats. I don't know what they're working on. And we get very worried about that. And we start trying to, collect metrics about this, about how they're working. And, even if your teams are co-located, you should do this anyway. But even remotely, you need to be more so, in that you don't care how they're working as much, as long as you are getting the outcomes that you need. So I could just again tell you from my teams. So our teams we're kind of a Scrum bond, more Kanban flow. So we have a Kanban board that makes all our work very, very visible. Our clients come to us with big ideas. We assemble a team. The team works through that Kanban board, produces product that then provides value to the end customer. That's what I'm worried about, is that value to the end customer. Am I getting that out there? Now, I collect all sorts of actual process metrics, how often things stay in sit-in lanes and how often this happens. And I do collect, team metrics, and I have individual metrics. I have to be very careful with how I use those. I have all of that, but that's mainly internally for us. And even at the team level, like sometimes leadership doesn't even see those. They can, but they don't pay attention to that, because the main thing they're worried about is, are my teams happy and are my clients happy? If those two things are happening, and you're doing it in a financially, solvent way, then then it's working. Don't look at all the stuff. Are they logging hours? These people who want to put stuff where, I want to see you log in the morning. I want to know when you're active, when you're not active. That's because they think they need to look at the work being done and how you're doing the work, rather than the outcome and the value that's being produced by that work. So one thing is, you need to kind of let that go. Again, not saying that you can't collect those metrics, but especially as leadership who's looking at these teams, let them work the way they need to work, and primarily focus on, are they producing value, at a speed and a quality that is justifying, this to the client, or what if it's an internal client or an external client customer. And also, is the team happy with the way they're working? Is it something, because team satisfaction can start to, if it goes down, you can start losing employees. It's hard for retention, et cetera, and productivity goes down. So, the other thing, the way to do that, I think, is to align your clients and your stakeholder success with your team's success. So if I'm going to start basing, really looking at outcomes, and I'm going to let the teams kind of deal with the internal process metrics and things like that, and output metrics and stuff like that, then I need to make sure they're aligned. So if I just come and say, I need you to crank out, 6 JIRA tickets a week, that's a very process metric. It's not, I don't know what the success of that is. The success is then just cranking out tickets. But if I come and say, hey, let's introduce you to the client or the stakeholders. Here's the problem they're trying to solve. Let's be very collaborative about this. This is how it will actually make us money. And you have to think about business value, and business value is, it's increased revenue. Does it protect revenue? Does it decrease costs? Does it avoid costs? If it does one of those 4 things, then it's a good thing for us to do. And how we do that can be a very collaborative thing. And if the team is tied to client success, then that's where the outcomes come out of that they are going to be very focused on getting that value out there. And as long as the value is consistently coming in there, then a lot of times stakeholders and things like that don't care. I don't care how you're doing it, because I'm seeing the results I want. And so make sure that your teams are, if at the very least, aware and educated on what is the success metrics for these stakeholders and clients. Even better yet, make them part of coming up with that. Make them work it. We do discovery sessions with our clients, and we do product visioning. We do, what are your business goals? All the team is involved in that, so that they know why we're building this for this client and what we think the outcomes are going to be. And then the clients, we give them all the same metrics. A lot of times they stop even looking at the metrics, because they're like, listen, I just want to make sure the team is happy, because I'm seeing the value I want. And I realize that I get that value I want because this team is working really well together. And so I don't need to see, cycle time and, hours and things like that. I'm seeing the value I want delivered consistently. And that's where a lot of this pressure of how things are getting done gets out there. And you don't have to worry about, I don't care if they're in the office or not in the office. I'm getting what I need out of it, the value. And I do think you get together when it makes sense. Can you do this work and never meet the other people you work with? Yes, I have worked on teams where I've never physically met the person I worked with. But I will say that even when I've worked on remote teams, every now and then getting together and putting a name to a face really helps a lot. It builds a lot of trust in between teams. I get to know them as a person. But you need to do that when it makes sense. And what makes sense for you might make sense for other people. What we found is, our biggest thing is team building. Teams that really, understand each other, and see each other as real people and have a high degree of trust. We just know they work well together. They just naturally collaborate well together. So actually, team building is kind of the number one thing we do get people together with. Again, before pandemic and things like that, things have slowed down since there. But getting the people together, we would do these regular what we called Camp Acklen, getting everybody in one location, doing a lot of team building stuff, doing some education stuff and things like that. But it was mainly just get to know these people, get to know the people you work with. And then also when we do an engagement kickoff. So when I first meet a client, they don't know us from anybody else. And they're going, again, because we are remote, they may not see the people that they work with that are doing the work regularly. So I want to bring a lot of the key team members up. They meet each other. We do some kickoff and discovery things like that, but we also do a lot of team building things. Just, I want you to recognize these as people on the other end of this. Because when I'm working remotely, that person isn't a person to me. They're a two-dimensional thing I see on a Zoom call every so often. And so building trust is a huge thing. And that's, all of this is to get to that trust. And I think trusting your teams becomes a big part of this. This is the feedback that I get from our employees, the employees who really like the way we work. And this is a direct quote from an employee. When I was doing prep work for this, I went out to all our employees and say, tell me about your remote experiences. And they were telling me different things. But this one stood out to me, and that one of our QA people, or now he's a Scrum Master, said, I trust that, the trust that they give me as an individual to get my job done. That is amazing. And it is one of those things. There's always going to be some bad actors. There's going to be some people that if you give them the freedom to do that, they will abuse that. But you can't let your distrust of one or two of those things possibly happening or happening in the past whitewash everybody. Like, you take these rules and say, now everybody has to do this because this one incident happened. Then you kind of punish everybody for that. So every now and then that happens and we deal with it accordingly, but we still extend that trust. There's been times where we kind of swung the pendulum back a little bit. Oh, this happened, so let's do this. And we did weird things, like you would go into a Slack channel and say, hey, I got to walk away for a little bit from the keyboard to go eat lunch or do this. And a little bot would check that. And then you had to come back in and tell your team was back. And that was senseless. We did that for maybe a month and we thought, this is stupid. This doesn't extend trust. The teams should be able to do this on their own, and we should trust them to do that. And we didn't have that problem moving forward. Now, I want to come back, and again, I've said nothing about tactics. I haven't said anything about tools or anything like that, because no matter how well you do that, if you don't really have a good culture around all of this, you're only going to get so many results out of that. Especially, again, if you're one of these companies that used to, and I've seen it. We had, I know companies that had just bought huge buildings and outfitted them with all this stuff, and then the pandemic hit and everybody got sent home. And all they were doing is waiting to bring everybody back as soon as they could. And, because they had invested all this money. And I get it. You invested in all this beautiful workspace and things like that. But you might have to, again, the reality is, because now people have gotten used to working this way, and there's companies who are willing to offer it as a first class offering of one of their benefits, you'll lose people. And we're seeing it. We're seeing people coming in. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to bring people in. There are certain, types of work that do require people to physically be together. But knowledge-based work doesn't always. I'm talking about agile software development. Are there certain types of work that is richer in communication and collaboration when I can all be together? Sure. But can I get close to that and get some other benefits that maybe outweigh what I lose by going and adopting this? Sure. And as long as you're very clear about why you're doing this. I don't like it when, developers just say, well, I'm more productive that way. Again, whether your increased productivity actually helps me as a company is a different thing, other than just simply retaining people. Then you're kind of hijacking the company and saying, if you don't allow me to work, I'm going to leave. and they will react out of fear. So I think it is both ways of being honest with yourself about why we are doing something, how much productivity it really does, where it does add value. The productivity thing is actually the least thing. The retaining talent, attracting talent, cost savings, and those types of things, that is actually the bigger value than the productivity thing, because I have seen where there is some parts of it are a lot less productive. As we said, watching people argue on Slack for an hour when I know that could have happened, or something being done and it's sitting there waiting because the communication's not there. We know this happens. We see it and feel it every day, sitting in all these meetings where we're trying to use the right tools to do these things, and somebody's on mute, somebody drops off, et cetera, somebody's connection goes down. I get that. And that adds up. That could be death by a thousand slices. But all those other things we talked about can outweigh some of that. Just be honest with yourself about why I'm doing this. So, I would love to hear what people are struggling with. I'm not going to do questions right now because we're just going to kind of do the recording of this. But if you are watching this afterwards, all my contact information is going to be up in a second. And if you're like, hey, I loved what you said there, but I'm struggling with this part, would love for you to connect with me. You can either email me or connect with me on LinkedIn. So let me do a wrap up real quick, and then we'll stop the recording part. So one, again, be realistic and pragmatic about why you want to be remote. A lot of times they're like, why are we being remote? Well, because we'll be more productive. Let's be realistic about that. As a company, why are you being remote? If you're just being remote and offering it because you're afraid you're going to lose people, you're probably not going to do it in the best way because you're only doing it out of fear. So be pragmatic about it. And again, when you do adopt some type of remote strategy, tie it into the company strategy. I want to provide the best environment for my teams to work. And I believe having flexible, work from home is a great way to do that. Okay. Really tie that in. Focus on outcomes and let teams be as autonomous as possible. If you focus on the outcomes, then where people work and how they work becomes less of the issue. Now, I'm not saying just totally ignore that, because then once the outcomes start, falling off, maybe that's a little too late. But that's where you should let the teams do that. That's where, especially if you're an Agile team, that's where, Scrum Masters should be, keeping up with statistics and things like that, seeing when the team is getting, stressors of these type of things, places where things might be falling down. That's where the team should be, monitoring that. And specifically, maybe a Scrum Master, if you have Agile coaches, those would be people who would kind of be making sure, all right, before this becomes a problem, let's get ahead of that. But that is something I would do with a co-located team as well. It just becomes even more important when I don't see these people face to face regularly. But again, if we're getting our work done, if we're collaborating well and putting out the end value at a acceptable speed with an acceptable level of quality in a way that's not killing all our people, that should be a good thing. Get together when it makes sense. I still think that getting together is a good thing. That may be an impossibility for some things, like if you are spread all over the world and you have, 20,000 people, you can't do that. But again, you don't have to get the entire company together, but teams. I'm talking about teams. Can the team get together when it makes sense? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And again, as the more widely distributed you get, that harder that is to do. So you may or may not to do that, but if you can get together when it makes sense, I personally believe that just doing it, because that's the thing, is somebody like, I don't want to spend money, company money just to get together to team building. That just seems, that seems like a waste of money. It is not. Teams that trust each other, who have spent time together and, make good use of that team building to really build those structures together, they obviously work well together. And then of course there's key times, like if you're remote, like within a location, like people are all around, like let's say Nashville. So I'm in Nashville and we have people in surrounding areas of Nashville and they're remote. Maybe I only bring them in the office when we're doing maybe a sprint planning or grooming sessions, times when there's a lot of face-to-face communication and rich communication would be the most beneficial. And then there's times where I'm doing more collaborative, or not collaborative, cooperative. I just need to make sure we're on the same page. Daily stand-ups, certain things like that. I think retros are a good one to be face to face because there's so much feeling and stuff like that in that and seeing body language. So get together when it makes sense as you can. And then lastly, that part is trust your teams. A lot of what I see in bad remote culture stems from distrust. I don't trust my teams. I don't trust they're doing their work. So what am I going to do? I'm going to put software on there that makes sure they're doing stuff. I've seen companies that said you have to log into a video session where I can see you working all day long, and you have to leave it on all day long so I can see you working. And again, that just shows I don't trust you, and that shows that you don't think remote is a viable thing for your company, and it's not going to work out for you very well. So that it wraps up the bulk of this here. If you're watching this later, you can connect with me on email. There's my email. Connect with me on LinkedIn. On Twitter, I'm not as active on Twitter as I used to be. LinkedIn is mainly where I'm putting stuff. If you're interested in looking at all my other stuff in O'Reilly, you can go to O'Reilly.TommyNorman.com and see those. If you want to go to Acklen Avenue to kind of see our work and also find links to our blog post and to our YouTube channel, where a lot of these recordings are there as well. And then we are doing, one of these webinars at least once a quarter. Sometimes we do more, but if you go to webinars.acklenavenue.com, that'll always take you to the latest webinar we're doing, and you can register there. And with that, I appreciate everybody hanging out with me, and we'll see you next time.